Ava Kingsley was a woman who owned half of what others only dreamed of. A billionaire business magnate known for her sharp instincts, designer suits, and flawless social presence, she commanded boardrooms and headlines alike. Her world was skyscrapers, private jets, and high-speed decisions. She was used to efficiency, used to obedience, and definitely not used to asking anyone for help, especially not someone who lived a life far removed from her own. But one summer afternoon, that dynamic shifted in a way she never expected. Ava was on her way to a luxury retreat in the countryside, an invitation-only event for elite entrepreneurs. Her sleek black SUV, outfitted with every modern convenience, sliced through the rural backroads with smooth precision until, without warning, the dashboard flickered and the car rolled to a quiet, choking halt. At first, she tapped the screen, tried the ignition again, called her assistant no signal. She stepped out, her designer heels sinking into the gravel, and looked around. No traffic, no homes, just endless green fields and the sound of insects humming under the sun. There wasn't even a breeze. She waited, assuming someone would drive by. 10 minutes passed. Then 20, still no one. Her frustration simmered into something deeper disbelief, maybe even a touch of fear. Ava wasn't used to being powerless, but with no one to command, no assistant to delegate to, and no car to rely on, she found herself completely alone. In the distance, she noticed a figure moving across the field. A man older, slow in movement, wearing overalls and a wide-brimmed hat, was carrying a bucket and heading toward a small wooden structure that looked like a chicken coop. Beyond that was a weathered farmhouse with peeling paint and a collapsed front fence. Desperation won over pride, and Ava started walking toward him. She reached the edge of the property and called out, "Excuse me." Her voice was firm, not used to softening. The man looked up from his work, squinted at her for a moment, and wiped his hands on a rag. "My car broke down," she said, trying to keep the edge out of her tone. "I need to use a phone, or if you have a vehicle, get into town." The man studied her for a long moment. "No landline here. Cell signal's only good up near the ridge. But you're welcome to come sit a while." She frowned. "That's not helpful." "I don't have time to sit. I have a meeting." He didn't argue. He just turned back toward the house and said, "Suit yourself," as he walked away. That interaction alone was jarring. People didn't usually turn their backs on Ava Kingsley, much less suggest she wait without explanation. She hesitated, then followed him. Something about the silence around her, the heat, and the isolation made her uneasy enough to accept his invitation. Inside the farmhouse, everything was worn but clean. The wooden floors creaked, and a fan buzzed faintly in the corner. There were no electronics. The man who introduced himself simply as Ben poured 2 glasses of water and set one in front of her. Ava took it reluctantly. She wasn't used to this kind of hospitality, the kind that didn't ask for anything in return. Ben didn't pry. He didn't ask who she was or what she did. He asked if she was hungry. She wasn't, but he offered her bread and jam anyway, homemade. He said, "From the blackberries behind the barn." An hour passed. Then 2. Her frustration was growing again when Ben quietly mentioned that his son would be returning with the truck soon, and they could take her into town then. She wanted to argue, wanted to ask why he hadn't told her that earlier, but she stopped herself. Instead, she noticed things. The way the light filtered through the curtains, casting quiet shadows on the wooden table. The way the old man moved steady, unrushed. He checked on his animals, fed the dogs, filled the troughs. No phone calls, no texts, no urgency. And yet, everything got done. Ava began to see the reverse image of her own life in this man. Her days were packed to the minute, but somehow here in the silence, time felt fuller. Slower, yes, but also richer. She hadn't had a real, uninterrupted conversation in months. She hadn't sat in stillness without looking at her phone in years. She asked Ben if he'd always lived here. He nodded and said the farm had belonged to his father, and his father before that. "Doesn't make much money," he said. "But we eat well, sleep deep, and don't owe anyone." That line stayed with her. Don't owe anyone. Ava, on the other hand, owed everyone something: investors, boards, media expectations, public image. She had more than she could count, and yet here she was, needing the help of someone who had less than she could imagine. By the time Ben's son returned, Ava's heels were off and her jacket was folded on a chair. She had helped feed the chickens, not entirely successfully, and her hands smelled faintly of hay. She rode in the back of the pickup truck, wind in her hair, watching the road wind through the hills. She didn't check her phone the entire way, that day. Something cracked inside her, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but a tiny shift, a beginning. She arrived in town, got her car towed, and made it to her retreat just a few hours late. No one would ever know about the small farmhouse on the hill, or the old man who taught her patience without saying a word, but she knew. And she wouldn't forget. Ava Kingsley had never been in a place so still. She had spent most of her life in cities that never stopped buzzing, always on the move, always building, always achieving. The silence around Ben's farmhouse felt foreign to her, like a different language she didn't know how to speak. She sat on the porch, her phone still useless, watching the sun dip lower behind the hills. The simplicity of it all felt both unnerving and oddly comforting. Ben, the old farmer who had welcomed her in without a single question about her status or name, was sitting in a creaky wooden chair beside her, sipping tea from a chipped mug. His hands were calloused, his face weathered, his posture relaxed. Everything about him exuded a quiet strength. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't seem to care who she was or what she owned. That, more than anything, unsettled Ava. In her world, people always cared. They were always watching, calculating, trying to figure out what they could gain from being close to her. But Ben asked nothing of her. When he spoke, it was about the land, the crops, the rhythm of the seasons. He talked about the year the drought hit hardest and how the chickens had stopped laying for 2 weeks straight. He talked about his wife, who had passed away a few years earlier, and how he still made her blackberry jam every summer because she used to love it. Ava listened, not out of politeness, but because there was something in his voice, something honest, unfiltered, and deeply human. She realized that Ben had something she had lost, or maybe never really had, a sense of peace not tied to success. He didn't rush through his sentences, he didn't wear a watch. He didn't carry burdens that didn't belong to him. And still, he had purpose. Every task he completed, no matter how small, seemed to matter to him. It wasn't about results. It was about presence, about care, about doing what needed to be done and not seeking applause for it. Ava looked around the small porch. The wood was old but well kept. A few pots of herbs sat on the windowsill. A wind chime jingled softly in the breeze. This wasn't wealth, not in the way she defined it, but there was abundance here. An abundance of time, of intention, of connection to the world around him. Ben knew the names of the birds that nested in the nearby trees. He could tell how much rain would come just by the smell in the air. He wasn't just living off the land. He was living with it. She thought of her penthouse apartment, sleek, cold, and surrounded by glass. Everything in it was expensive, but nothing in it felt alive. Her shelves were filled with awards, but none of them made her feel anything anymore. Her refrigerator was stocked, but she never cooked. Her table seated 10, but she usually ate alone. She had built a fortress of luxury around herself, and yet here she was, barefoot on a stranger's porch, more grounded than she had been in years. Ben offered her a second cup of tea. She took it without thinking. He didn't ask questions. He didn't probe. But in that silence, Ava started talking. She told him about her company, the deals, the nonstop travel, the meetings that blurred into each other. She talked about how tired she was, though she had everything people claimed they wanted. She told him that sometimes, even in a room full of powerful people, she felt completely alone. Ben listened without judgment. When she finished, he looked at her and said, "The world's taught us to chase after more. But sometimes more just means further from yourself." The simplicity of the sentence hit her harder than any motivational speech she'd heard. It was true. She had been chasing for so long more success, more money, more recognition that she didn't even know what she was running from, or where she was trying to go. And here was a man with very little by the world's standards who seemed to have already arrived at something she'd missed entirely. He stood and walked out into the yard, calling the dogs over to him. She watched him kneel down, scratch their heads, smile. There was no performance in him, no need to posture. He just existed, and that was enough. He didn't need to impress anyone because he wasn't measuring his life against anyone else's. He was content. Not in a resigned way, but in a way that came from deep knowing of himself, his purpose, and what mattered most. Later, as she helped him bring in a basket of eggs, she asked him if he ever wished for more. He smiled, not dismissively, but with genuine warmth. I've got enough to eat, a roof that doesn't leak, and hands that still work. What more would I do with more? Ava didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense out loud. That night, he offered her the guest room. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the contrast between her life and his. She thought about how much she'd sacrificed for the image of success. How many holidays she'd missed, how many family calls she'd ignored, how many nights she spent staring at spreadsheets instead of stars. She was beginning to understand what real wealth looked like. It wasn't the size of your bank account. It was being able to sleep without anxiety clawing at your chest. It was knowing your neighbor's name and growing your own food. It was sharing a meal without checking your phone. It was helping a stranger not because of who they were, but because they needed help. In that small farmhouse, surrounded by fields and chickens and quiet conversations, Ava began to see the difference between being rich in things and being rich in life. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had something to work toward that actually mattered.